in Hebrew education, that's the first book they start with. And so you think about, the education, because obviously it was around during the time of Christ, and you think about that was the education he started with, was Leviticus. Same curriculum. It hasn't changed in thousands of years. But it spans Leviticus 6 through 8. And I highlighted some things. And so since it's one of those passages a lot of people oftentimes skip over, there are a lot of details. I thought about some things while reading it today that kind of, people always like to relate things to themselves. I think that's human nature, and that's human mind. It can be a flaw of people sometimes because they always want something in their image. And then, sometimes we have idols of fear and idols of anxiety and idols of pride and ego. And so sometimes it's good to get away from our own image. But, for the sake of, learning something, it's good to be able to relate to something. If you look at Leviticus 6, it says, "And Adonai spake unto Moses, saying, If a soul sin and commit a trespass against Adonai, and lie unto his neighbor in that which was delivered him to keep, or in fellowship, or in a thing taken away by violence, hath deceived his neighbor, or hath found that which was lost, and lieth concerning it, and sweareth falsely, in any of these that a man doeth, sinning therein, then it shall be, because he hath sinned and is guilty, that he shall restore that which he took violently away, or the thing which he hath deceitfully gotten, or that which was delivered him to keep, or the lost thing which he found." This is, I like a lot of the wording and the legislation, and it's God's perfect instruction. But there's such an element, like in Exodus, one of my passages I refer to a lot is the portion about if a man falls in a hole you dug, you restore, what we've caused. And really every instruction is about rectifying, making things whole. And the thought that immediately comes to mind is, what if the entire world, lived with this same motive? Because it's saying, if you once you realize you came about anything that, in a deceitful way, to restore that. So, if we can, it's really not even possible in this era of the world, but think about a world where there's no deception. There's no deception. I guess there wouldn't be any politicians. But you think about a world where there's no deception, it's just complete honesty and complete reconciliation. That would be a wonderful thing. There'd be no more fraud. There would be no more people preying on the elderly. There would be no more, of people taking advantage of others. If everyone applied that. And, so that's one of the things I originally noticed and thought about, and it goes into the offering to bring. If you skip down to 17, it says, "It shall not be baked with leaven, and I've given unto them for their portion of my offerings made with fire. It is most holy as the sin offering and the trespass offering. And all the males of the children of Aaron shall eat of it, and it shall be a statute forever in your generations. The offerings, of the offerings made by fire." It says, "Everyone that toucheth them shall be holy." And notice, there's no leaven. Just like, and this time in the calendar, we're approaching the time of Passover, and the removal of leaven and the remembrance of Egypt and the bondage and people in being delivered, and leaven always represents that sin. Just like honey, wasn't to be given in the offerings because honey can ferment, and it makes a mess, and so things that represent the leaven is also included. Not to be given in leaven. Because we don't want to consume sin. It just like you think about with the command to restore anything you got in a guilty way, in a violent way, it says. Anything you got by theft or by being deceitful. You really think about that, and dishonesty is at the core of all sins, right? Because when we're being dishonest with ourselves, when we are an idol, when we do all the sins, thou shalt not steal. You're stealing time away if you don't enter into his rest. You're stealing, adultery. You're stealing someone else's, significant other there. With all the sins, it's like theft is at the heart of it. That's why it goes into restoring what you stole first. Because from what we're either stealing from ourselves, we're either stealing from God, we're stealing from someone else. Theft is at the core. Robbery, robbery of God, that is at the core of all sins. And, leaven is the reason for that, because we feel like we're entitled, like we can do this. When you go down to 25, it says, speaking to Aaron and to his son, saying, this is the law of the sin offerings, and the place where the burnt offering is killed shall be the sin offering. And it says it shall be killed before Adonai is most holy. And it explains that the fire should continue to burn. But, another thing, when you really read the full text, is you understand that the person bringing the offering, it's the same concept. So this is same concept. I know over the weekend I talked about having, from the heart, with the Beatitudes and Sermon on the Mount and Matthew 5. Matthew 5 is the same concept as this. The offering must come from the heart, because it said if the offering doesn't come from the heart, its intention is no good. It is not good. Anything can't be done out of fear. It can't be done out of just because I got to, like a ritualistic thing. It is coming from the heart. And people even talk about I've had people mention, well, they say that's animal cruelty. But in actuality, you got to understand, these people the animals are going to be consumed regardless. This is having them participate in the redemption process and elevating, them from being just a normal thing consumption to consumption before the Lord, before God. And the fire was to continue to go. And that's how our spiritual life should be. It should be an ever-burning fire. Think about burnout, and think about people that get tired on their job or get tired spiritually, and sadly, many people get tired morally. I've heard people say, well, I feel like I've been doing the right thing for too long and I'm not getting enough blessings. Then that's a very fleshly way looking at it, but many people do. And it says, it's a continual fire that shall burn upon the altar. It should not go out. And the altar is not just a place. It is a symbol of the human heart and the human mind. And like I said, it's a place of redemption and change. So you got to think, the fires that are in our life, what is that fire? Is it anxiety? Some people have fires of anxiety and they're just going anxious. Or is it like ego? Is it humility? That's a good one. Humility is a good fire. But we have some bad fires in there too, where we choose to just remain oblivious. And some people, even more so, like I've referenced, some of the people that are involved in a lot of corrupt money and corrupt things. There's a lot of rectification needed before they can have complete peace. So it's, a lot to think about. And with the sin offerings and the burnt offerings, so they were discusses two types of offerings. You had the burnt offering, it's called the olah, and the sin offering. The burnt offering is, the sin offering was to be consumed. The burnt offering was burnt. The ashes were, outside the camp. But one thing you'll find is these two are related because they're done, it says, toward the north in the same place. So when you look at the word that is used there, when it says, that it's to be done towards the north. Now again, I like to study it, and I'll look at especially with these books, I'll look at the Hebrew words. It uses a word called, Saphon, and it's the same word that alludes to thought. So you think about this, same concept from Matthew 5, when he said that if you've got hated against your brother, you've already killed him. Or, with the lust, you're already in adultery. These things, it's harder to rectify things in our mind than it is things in the physical. Because think about how many times you've messed up and you've done something you shouldn't do. You get mad, you do something fleshly, right? And it's spur of the moment. Well, at least that can be, you can say, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. Like I mentioned, the guy in traffic, he can say, I'm sorry for giving you the bird, and that's rectified. That's fine. But things that are within, that don't come out here, that are just brewing within, a fire brewing within of, anxiety, anger, prejudices, hatred, lust, and it's hard to rectify that, because you got to get it into the physical space to redeem it. You got to get it out. And that's why, Scripture talks about bringing every thought into subjection, casting down, every imaginative part of the process. That way it can be redeemed. So what you come to really understand is these things are connected in the heart. And too many people today, it relates back to what we talked about over the weekend, too many people are, they worship in mind. They'll say, well, I know this and it's a checklist and I'm not going to learn anything new. I'm just going to believe that same doctrine I learned as a kid. Check this off. And they worship in physicality. Maybe they go to church, but like I said, worship can't replace reconciliation and redemption. So there's got to be a heart aspect. And when you truly love God, and when you bring God in every aspect of your life, when you're really in love with Him, even in our prayers, do we only pray because we need things? Or even if you make a routine of praying. I've had seasons of my life where I struggled really badly with depression and anxiety, to the point to where even my prayers were a burden. And it's not supposed to be that way. So I was still trying to pray so many times a day, but it was like, oh, here this goes again. And I didn't really have anything going on in the heart. So the heart is where all things are connected. That's where it all comes together, is in the heart. Knowing the truth, knowing things, you can know and still not have love. And love is very important. Otherwise it says the fire will go out. And, we have to keep the fire going. So think about things that we would need to, there were trespasses against God and trespasses against man. Things that need reconciling. Say if I stole money from you, or I took something, or my landlines, and, we have an argument. And again, we know the commandments that are trespasses against the Father. But think about the things that we need to surrender with the burnt offerings, because these were the things of reconciliation. Of, okay, now I didn't know it was wrong, or maybe I kind of did. Now I know. Now I'm fully aware of what I did was wrong, and I need to reconcile this. And, if you're having to confront death, because they had to slaughter the animal before handing it over to the priest, you can no longer take life in a lackluster way anymore, because you got to confront death to reconcile what you have messed up. I've stolen. I have done my family wrong. Now I'm having to look death in the face and understand that same fate awaits me, and I need reconciliation. I need redemption. So it's completely different way of looking at it. And think about the things that we should put on the altar of the burnt offering. Our ego and our need for control all the time. Our need to really dominate the outcomes. We got to know how it's going to end up. One of Miss Mary Beth's favorite sayings that I share with her is, things end up the way they're supposed to end up. This is true. God is going to do something. And look at all the details He spends arranging little things. I look back at my life and think about things like with my family, me and my wife, and all these little things. You think about all the time God spends on little things. So we got to have control too much, and that really kind of inhibits us. If you look over in chapter 7 and verse 18, it says, if any of the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering be eaten, all on the third day it shall not be accepted, neither shall it be imputed unto him that offereth it. It shall be an abomination, and the soul that eateth it shall bear his iniquity. Again, see, numbers are really important. You're going to see 3 in this portion. You're going to see 7. We see those same numbers in the New Testament. But notice that, that third day says, and any of the flesh of the sacrifice piece are to be eaten on the third day. It says, it's imputed. You bear the iniquity at this point. And it goes into, not touching that which is unclean, handling things the way we should, and it's establishing that people need redeeming. People need redeeming. They need redemption, and anything that is redeemingful requires good intention. But like I said, heart. One of the things scriptures I like a lot about this is the last part of it when you jump over to 8. And the end of it towards, verses, and I wrote them down, but I can't read my own handwriting. Well, if you look at 8, 10, and 11, and Moses took the anointing oil and anointed the tabernacle, all that was therein, and sanctified them, and sprinkled thereof upon the altar 7 times. See, again, numbers. Because think about number, 7 is that perfect number of, the image of God's creation. There's seven oceans, there's 7 continents. You look at the 2 eyes, your nose, as far as holes in the body, 7 main body parts, 2 arms, 2 legs, this head, 7. 7's everywhere. 7 is completion. And it says that they had to anoint it with this oil that was made. But when you go down to verse 21, he washed the inwards of the leg. Moses burnt the whole ram upon the altar, and a sweet savor made by a fire to Adonai, and they commanded Moses. And he brought the other ram, the ram of consecration, and his sons, and laid their hands upon the head of the ram. But this verse 23 is what I really noticed. It says, and he slew it, and Moses took the blood of it and put it upon the tip of Aaron's right ear, the thumb of Aaron's right hand, and the great toe of his right foot. the right ear and the right hand and the right foot. Why? Because our right side is associated with strength. I'm a lefty, but there's more right-handed people in the world. Everybody, it's like right is associated with strength, even with our minds and the way things work. But also, what do we do with that big toe? It leads us. We should be walking in a different direction for redemption. The ear, we hear, so at this point we need to be shutting off negativity and not listening to negativity. You got to watch what you feed yourself, because how do we end up in them trespass places? By listening to negativity. Think about the people bringing the offering because they have hatred against their brother and because they've done something they shouldn't. It probably started in the heart when they heard hearsay, when they heard gossip. I see, in my office, I'm the only guy. I see a lot of situations where things become really big, and it starts off with just one person said something, and it's like the telephone gave. By the time you get to the end, it's something completely different. So it started in the heart, but it entered the heart through the ear. You think about we're walking a different direction. Then the hands, we do work with these. That's why it says to bind his word as a sign upon you between the eyes. Why? Because you think with that's inside there. And your right hand, because you do work with your right hand. Our work should be for him. Our thoughts should be for him. Because that is how we keep our heart invested in him. Otherwise, the fire will go out. So our altar, like I said, is not just a place. It represents the heart. And, it requires, action to, because the scripture says that everything is going to be exposed at one day. All things. So these sacrifices, this process of redemption exposes all things. It corrects, it rectifies. That's why there's scripture in Ezekiel and Jeremiah and scriptures discuss when the Messiah comes, in the rebuilding of the temple and, the priest, because it makes the priest from the line of Aaron, it's an eternal covenant made with him. And it goes into what the world, because when the Messiah comes, the world will be free of this, and it'll be free of deception, free of confusion, free of, all that really sidetracks us. But that was my thought, is that our fire doesn't go out. And I made a couple, other notes while reading this about, think about with the offerings, the sin offering is brought for rebellion, but it's often unintentional. People have a hard time admitting when they're wrong after the fact and during the process. And really that's part of loving him and loving God, is being able to, admit, hey, I was wrong. Or we take the other end of the spectrum and say, you know what, I know I was wrong, but I'm going to keep doing it that way. I think it's okay to do it this way. That's the way modern people think. So when we do that, it's like we fail through actions and misalignment, and it to the point to where we just unconsciously don't serve him. But what this truly teaches us is that unintended thoughts, they matter. Our thoughts matter. Our heart matters. Our thoughts matter. And it's not just about feeling guilty. You can be caught for something and feel guilty, but it's about wanting to realign with his will. Because when you look at it through that lens, like I said, it's hard to rectify what's going on in here. But when you have hatred, when you have disdain, when you have things in your heart that you shouldn't, and we've all had them from time to time, you leave these, like I said, it's like leaving sinkholes in your life. And, if we don't watch it, we'll fall into them because it was already brewing within. And there were some other things I noticed just while reading it. It detailed about the fat being burned on the altar. Why? And I actually thought about Uncle Jeff when I read that, because he likes gristle. And he loves to eat gristle. And fat is the most energy-dense part of the animal, but it's also like that rich, the fat burns off and it seasons everything. If you ever smoked a brisket, it's real good. He's putting pleasure and desire on the altar, because, like I said, this week I was thinking about Passover, and I thought about what Egypt, did to Israel. And it pushed them to a place where there's no more any joy in daily life. My joy has to come from God at that point. If I'm being pushed to such intense labor, they made them make their own bricks. And now, okay, you got to make the bricks and get the straw, find the straw. They were making, women do men's jobs and men do women's jobs. Just inverted. It broke the backs of them until they can only get joy in and through the Most High. And, we have to, when we live by pleasure and desire, we get sidetracked. So the strongest desires that are within us, they have to be addressed. If you have an appetite for something, it's like addiction. If you have a tendency to, we got to know who we are as people and know what we struggle with. I always say, address the appetite, and you got to feed it the right thing, and you got to use that to do a better action, to override the bad. That's just like someone that struggles with alcoholism. It wouldn't be a good job to necessarily start an outreach at going to bars or something. Not a good move, or anything. But we know what we struggle with, and we know what is going on inside us, and we really got to address that. Because really we'll find that it's just like when you see families split up and marriages fall apart. I see so many, as working in the field I see so many families that could have been saved. It's just that people drew apart and they didn't address things. They didn't talk about it with each other. They didn't say, hey, what's going on, So we have to pray that our relationship with people is not like that, because, the Bible is clear about rectifying things, not just with God, but people too. And then, the last thing I'll share with you is they remove the kidneys. Think about that. Kidneys are a big part in the processing. It gets, it's an inner guidance thing. Everything goes through your kidneys. All of our judgments, all of the things we do have to go through the voice of God, have to go through his instruction. The priest removed the ashes. That reminded me when I was reading that of how we got to let go of yesterday. Let go of, all of the things we're holding on to that are keeping us from making things right with God, making things right with our fellow brother or sister, and making sure we really pursue him. Because again, fire doesn't destroy energy, it redirects it. You ever threw something on a fire you wasn't supposed to? I've been burning trash and a hairspray can be in there before, and and so it didn't destroy it redirected the energy. And sometimes it's with our spiritual life, we need to be on fire for God. And when we put the wrong thing on there, sometimes we get on fire in pride and we think we're doing the right thing. There's a lot of really overzealous, movements, and people feel like they're right, but really they're burning the wrong thing. Love and humility. God is love, his humility. So, what are we placing into our fire? What is the offering bringing to light? What does our mind and our heart, have to do? So the last 4 notes I made today at my lunch break when I was reading this is, your mind is an altar, your thoughts are offerings, your passion, your appetite, that's your fuel, and your conscience is the guide. So if you're not feeling that conscious pull, and I don't know how a lot of people that do some of the crimes and things they do in the world don't have a conscience about it, it's a sad world we live in. I can't imagine like some of the atrocities against people that you see in the world these days. Kids being abused and people being killed and just senseless crime. I don't get it. But they've quit heeding to that voice that God put within, and they've just listening to the wrong influence. And now all that started in the heart. You look at these murders that have happened around our city the past few weeks. That started in the heart. You just don't wake up one day and you're going to go shoot somebody. That started in the heart. So we have to address things before it gets to that point. We need inner refinement. And, we can't meditate on the bad things all the time. Sometimes we need to turn off the news, turn off the things that are troubling our minds, turn off the worry. It's like when you're going through a sickness, sometimes the worst thing you can do is pull up Google. Katie did that when she was going through some things recently, and then she's worried about this and this and this, and then your worry is worse than the actual problem, So just take it day by day, trust God, lean to him. Figure out why we're doing what we're doing sometimes. So that's all I had to share this evening. Any other